Port wine. Information, background, and history on port wine, followed by a foot treading video demonstrating one of the processes of making port wine. Port wine is a Portuguese fortified wine produced exclusively in the Douro Valley in the northern provinces of Portugal. It is typically a sweet red wine, often served as a dessert wine, though it also comes in dry, semi-dry, and white varieties. Fortified wines in the style of port are often produced outside Portugal. However, under European Union protected designation of origin guidelines, only the product from Portugal may be labeled as port or Porto. In the United States, wines labeled port may come from anywhere in the world. Port is produced from grapes grown and processed in the demarcated Douro region. The wine produced is then fortified by the addition of a neutral grape spirit known as aguardente. That is added in order to stop the fermentation, leaving residual sugar in the wine and to boost the alcohol content. The fortification spirit is sometimes referred to as brandy, but bears little resemblance to commercial brandies. The wine is then stored, aged in barrels, in a lodge or cellar before being bottled. The wine received its name port in the latter half of the 17th century from the seaport city of Porto at the mouth of the Douro River, where much of the product was brought to market for export to other countries in Europe. The Douro Valley, where port wine is produced, was defined and established as a protected region or appellation in 1756, making it the third oldest, after Chianti in 1716 and Tokay in 1730. The second half of the 18th century was a significant period in the history of port and saw the start of several developments which would transform port into the great fortified wine that we know today. Foremost among these was fortification. In the early days, as we have seen, brandy was sometimes added to wines at the time of shipment to fortify them against the rigors of the sea voyage. However, the practice of adding brandy to the wine before it had finished fermenting, now an inseparable part of the process of making port, was seldom followed in the early part of the 18th century. As the century progressed, it became more common as it was found to result in wines that were sweeter, stronger, more aromatic, and of greater appeal to the English consumer. However, not all merchants encouraged this practice, and it was not until well in the 19th century that this method of fortification became widely adopted. Nevertheless, it gradually gained acceptance. The prosperity of the last years of the 18th century released the capital necessary to accumulate stocks of wine and mature them for longer. The superior aging potential of port wines that have been fortified became apparent. The turning point is sometimes said to have been the exceptional harvest of 1820, which produced ports so magnificent that subsequent vintages could not approach the richness or power unless they were fortified. In any event, fortification had become widespread by the 1840s, and by 1850 was probably universal.
Well, the treading is now underway. Can you describe to me what is going on here?
Well, this is where the pickers who have been picking all day and the grapes have come down, filled this lagar, and what they're doing is something that we call the cut. And the cut is when they are literally marching in tune. I mean, you can hear somebody now, left, right, or up, down is what he's saying. And the idea is they're stepping on all of the berries, bursting them all, releasing all of the juice. And this process takes about 2 hours.
That's quite a strenuous process, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is, after having spent 8 hours picking in the heat on these hills, to come down and essentially do a Stairmaster for 2 hours. The good news, I guess, is that at the end of this, they get to sing and dance, and it becomes a bit more of a party. But this is a very, very serious process, and that's why you can only hear the sound of the person calling the time. There's no other noise in the winery. And the reason for that is that getting a good cut is absolutely critical to how we make the port. This is the beginning of the process, and you really need to open all the berries, to burst all the berries. And the only way you're going to do that is in this very disciplined fashion. As they step in time, they then move together in the lagar and achieve the bursting of every berry.
So they're in two opposite lines and the lines are slowly going to meet in the middle. What happens then? Do they turn around and go back the other way?
They then actually work. They don't always just turn around. They sometimes just march backwards away from each other for the next hour, or sometimes one will continue to go forward while one is going back. So it depends what the chap calling the time is going to want them to do.
So why is it so important that the grapes are trodden in this traditional manner?
Well, the reason is that if you think of a grape, you've got the skins, which is where all the colour and flavour is, and then inside you've got white flesh, and in the middle of that you've got the pips. So what we want to do is to burst the berries, start to work the skins to extract all the colour and all the flavour. But what we don't want to do is damage any of those pips because they've got harsh tannins in them. And that's why the human foot's really good. If you ever want to try and do this at home, you've got two options. One, you can fill your bath with some grapes and count the pips afterwards. The other is, if you just try, with a peppercorn to break it under your thumb against your kitchen table, you'll find that it doesn't break. And you put it under a knife, you'll break the peppercorn. Put it under your thumb, you won't. That's exactly what's happening to the pips below these treaders' feet.
And is that what keeps the texture of the port so soft and velvety?
Exactly. It stops the excessive tannins being released from the pips, which would make it rougher and harder. And yes, that smoothness comes. And apart from that, also comes, of course, from the richness of the flavours and the fruit. But this is a process that goes on for 2 hours, and because it's kind of tough, they at the end have something that they call liberdad or liberty. And the idea of liberty is probably best encapsulated in a poem, which, if you translate it into English, it goes, "Liberty, our liberty, only to the few you're known. If only I had liberty just to call my feet my own." And it's the idea that the sergeant major stops calling the time and they are then in control of their own feet and they can sing and dance, and that's when the party really gets going. We get a guy on accordion and music happens, we get the birdie song going and a bit of brandy gets passed around and we have a party.
So they sing and dance actually in the lagar?
Absolutely, yes. Nothing better than being knee-deep in wine for a good party.
I hope you enjoyed my video on port wine. Saúde!